Welcome to the Leigh-on-Sea History Channel, where we walk the seashore of the past.
Over the centuries, the Old Town High Street has no doubt flooded a great many times. Relatively recent photographic evidence has captured some of these occasions when damage and inconvenience were caused to both homes and businesses alike. Here in 1895, we see the results of a flood on the High Street opposite the Peterboat. 26 years later, in 1921, we see flooding near Bell Wharf, close to the former railway station, looking east. Pictured here, almost identical levels of flooding in much the same area in November 2020. This image sees the harbour master James Oliver outside his office on Bell Wharf during the flood of 1921. To the right is the corner of Francis Turnage's sail-making loft, later used by the Fishermen's Collective. In 2020, we see the tide inundate the former Fishermen's Cooperative building. Ironically, this building survived a great many floods, including the ones of 1895 and 1921, but it had been damaged by a mysterious fire in 2020 and has since been demolished. However, no flood in recent times can compare to the Great Flood of 1953, remembered now as the worst peacetime disaster to ever strike Britain. The total death toll on land is estimated at 307 people, 120 of them in Essex. Poor communications and lack of preparedness no doubt played a major part in this tragedy. On the afternoon of the 31st of January 1953, tide watchers noted the weak ebb, a sure sign that trouble was in store. That night, due to a combination of a high spring tide and a storm surge, no one could have predicted that the next incoming tide would flood the land up to 18 foot 4 inches above the average sea level. The North Sea would rise in fury and overwhelm the Essex coast, the old town of Leigh-on-Sea included, sweeping through the cocklesheds and along the High Street to a depth of 3 feet. On Two Tree Island, 2 men had to be rescued by Leigh fishermen after being marooned on the roof of the sewage works that once stood there. In nearby Canvey, the tide peaked at 7 feet above the predicted level. The low-lying island is usually visible from Marine Parade and other high points in Leigh, but on Sunday morning, the 1st of February 1953, nothing but the tops of trees and houses were visible above the water. Tragically, 58 people lost their lives on Canvey to the freezing flood tide. With the Dunkirk and wartime spirit still fresh in people's minds, Ken Bowlby and other Leigh fishermen set out at first light and worked all day and the following days to rescue people from inaccessible and dangerous areas, collecting them from Small Gaines Creek and taking them to Bell Wharf in Leigh. The survivors were transported by a convoy of cars to St Clement's Hall, where the cold and wet were given tea, hot food and clothes donated by the townsfolk. The Leigh fishermen, with their flat-bottomed boats, were crucial in the house-to-house search for survivors. They also undertook the grim task of retrieving the bodies on Canvey. The devastation was so bad on the island that nearly all its residents were evacuated, and it was briefly felt that the island should simply be abandoned to the sea. Of course, the local people would have none of this, and Canvey rose again. In her book, The Old Town Leigh-on-Sea, Carol Edwards reproduces the council minutes from February 1953. They record a report submitted by the Chief Constable and the Chief Fire Officer about the flooding. Late on Saturday night, information received that abnormally high tides were expected. The Chief Constable stated that immediate steps were taken to warn the inhabitants of Southend and the old town of Leigh-on-Sea. At 11:37, the automatic flood warning signal on the pier sounded in the central police station, and further warnings were given out in the borough. Referring to the damage caused by the recent flooding, the pier and foreshore manager reported that £11,945 was the estimated cost of repairs and replacement of equipment. £13,570 was required to restore property, with a further £1,500 needed to complete the restoration work. The financial cost of the flood is of course meaningless compared to the loss of life, and Leigh-on-Sea counts itself luckier than its neighbour Canvey and of course other parts of Britain, Holland and Belgium that were devastated by the flood. Today, on the wall of the Heritage Centre, a blue plaque marks the level of the floodwater. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe and share this video with people who you think might like it if you enjoyed it.